Hey guys, what's going on? So in this one, we are going to be covering all things Futaba. She just dropped today, and this is going to be my character guide. I will hopefully be able to cover her skills and what they do, to her weapons, to her card sets, to what stats you want to build on her to get the most out of her, and all things in between. I wrote like a college thesis in Google Docs this morning on her. Hopefully I didn't forget anything, but as I say in all these videos, if I did forget anything or you have additional questions, just leave a comment down below and I'll do my best to answer whatever I can for you. But to start it off with the obvious info here, we're looking at Futaba, and she is going to be a navigator, and what she generally does is she is a weakness implanter, and she has a lot of general buffing and debuffing capabilities. And I think the best place to start is kind of in the persona section, and her persona is Necronomicon. And I think before we get into the skills, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over her A0 first, because the A0 typically like sets the foundation for what the character does, or at least it kind of defines some of the language of the other kind of status effects or buffs or debuffs that are used in the skills. And so this is data scan. It's her A0. After an ally uses the skill, Futaba gains 5% to her analysis progress. Her analysis progress is like a bar that will provide like additional effects on the skill 1 and 2 that allow you to use the skill 3. We'll get into it once we get into the skills. Also, when an ally deals weakness damage with a skill, resonance, or highlight, Futaba gains 20% more to her analysis progress bar. So she's getting 5% every turn that an ally uses a skill, and she'll get more based on if it's a, kind of a weakness hit with a skill or a follow-up or a highlight. The interesting thing here is when Data Storm is active, increase the party's damage by 10, 15, or 20% based on Futaba's level. So it kind of scales with her levels. So at level 1, level 50, level 70 are like the scaling levels. For most of us, I don't think this really matters because we're all going to just like max Futaba anyway. If dealing weakness damage, double this damage increase. So you'll be doing 40% additional damage if you're hitting weakness, and you're going to have Data Storm on pretty frequently. So yeah, I'd say this is like kind of the baseline of Futaba's kit, right? All right, so now let's move into the skill 1. It's Pen Test Complete. So Pen Test Complete for 3 turns decreases all foes' defense by 6%, decrease defense by an additional 0.53% more for every 100 points of Futaba's attack, up to 4,600 of attack. But the one thing you're going to want to do on Futaba, especially, well, where we're at now in the game, once the Mindscape opens up, this changes a little bit, but for now, you're going to want 4,600 attack for Futaba. That's kind of her breakpoint in terms of max efficiency on her buffing and debuffing. So at like max efficiency, so Futaba, we're going to assume for most of this that Futaba's at 4,600 attack, because that's what you're going to want to build into. This skill will provide 24.38% additional defense down, and then adding the 6% that's flat with just using the skill, you're going to be doing 30.38 defense down on all enemies for 3 turns. And then additionally, when a foe with this defense decrease takes weakness damage, multiply the effect by 2. And then almost equally as important to that is if Futaba's analysis progress is at 100%, also grant Data Storm to all allies for 2 turns. We covered Data Storm in the A0 portion. That's what gives the additional damage up. And if you're hitting a weakness, it'll be 40%, 20% otherwise. And Data Storm is what allows you to use the skill 3 with Futaba. So you can't use Futaba's skill 3 unless you're using it on an ally who has a Data Storm. So this is it actually makes her rotation a little bit simpler because you're kind of forced to use skill 1 before you use the skill 3, or I guess the skill 2. We'll get into the skill 2 briefly right now just because it's not, the skill 1's better. You're going to be using the skill 1 and the skill 3. The skill 2 is not really going to get used much, but vulnerability found. For 3 turns, it increases one foe's damage taken by 6%, increased damage taken by 0.57% more for every 100 points of Futaba's attack, up to 3680. So that will cap out at 26.98%, adding the flat 6% to what her max efficiency would be here. So a big damage up, but the difference here is you don't have that double up effect, and kind of it's so much defense shred on the skill 1 that it kind of, I think, in my opinion, outweighs like the 26% damage up. And then it also provides like additional help for your analysis progress. And then for her skill 3, Data Link Established, which is like, this is kind of her bread and butter skill, right? So it's usable when allies have Data Storm, like I mentioned. So you have to use skill 1 or skill 2 first to apply Data Storm to then be allowed to use the skill 3. But for 2 turns, increase one ally's attack by 270, an additional 21.7 more for every 100 points of Futaba's attack, up to 4,600 attack. Again, that attack breakpoint of 4,600. If you add together kind of max efficiency for this, plus the flat 270, it puts you to 1,268 attack for 2 turns. So, almost 1,300 attack you're getting. In addition, kind of, what everyone touts Futaba's kit to be about, she inflicts virus on all foes for 1 turn based on target ally's attribute. So this is what is the weakness implant portion of her kit. Although to me, it's more like a weakness shred than a weakness implant, because she's not putting weakness on. She's kind of just shredding their resistance level 2 elements by 1, if that makes any sense. So if there's 3 enemies and you use Data Link Established on Joker, and all 3 of those enemies null curse, they will then resist curse instead of null, repel, or drain, whatever, right? So it turns invulnerable to resist, it turns resist to normal, it turns normal to weak, and then it makes weakness, if they're already weak to that attribute, it makes them take 25% more damage, which I think for the most part is kind of where you're going to be using Futaba. Like even this week in the guild bosses, spoiler alert, it's Dominion, and I plan on using Futaba with Joker to get this additional 25%. So yes, it could be useful for using kind of off-element characters in boss fights, but I think still its most useful effect is going to be just adding on to additional weakness damage. The next skill is just the stat buff. It's the classic, every navigator has this. They share their stats with the rest of the team. 5 stars share a little bit more. I believe it's 20% for 5 stars and 15 for 4 stars, I think it is. Then her first passive talent is Programming Pro. At the start of battle, Futaba gains 100% to her analysis progress. So basically, you can use the skill 1 to get Data Storm right away when Futaba kind of comes off her initial kind of cooldown when the fight starts. And then her second passive is Rootkit. When Data Storm is active, grant all allies a shield equal to 30% of Futaba's attack for 3 turns. This is one I don't really make a point of like thinking about it because it's just like a passive effect, but I don't think this is one you really have to think too much about. It's just like a nice little passive bit of sustain that Futaba is applying. And now I want to take a second to go over the awarenesses. We're not going to go like too deep into the awareness. So her A1 is payload optimization. When Futaba's analysis progress reaches 100% or Data Storm is active, increase allies crit rate by 12%. So very good, right? I don't think it's game breaking. I don't think it's like character defining. To me, Cord's weapon is like an example of like a kit changing factor, right? If you want to go for it, but it's not like mandatory or necessary. Nothing is mandatory and necessary in this game, obviously. But yeah, I think if you're torn or you're on the fence, like her kit is fully intact at A0. The A2 is basically if Futaba's debuffed an enemy, it gives the person attacking that enemy an additional 25% attack. She gives you kind of like a sturdy, where if you take a hit that would KO you otherwise, once per fight, you can live it with 1 HP, and then she'll provide your team 20% of her attack a shield for 3 turns. The A3 is just like a skill boost. Kind of every unit has these 2 awarenesses where it just is like skill leveling up. A4 adds a new effect called Security Flaw. Anytime a highlight's used, she gets a stack of this. And then when she uses her skill 1 or 2, you're going to spend these Security Flaw stacks, up to 2 stacks, to increase effect by 8% for each stack. A5 is another skill break. And then A6 obviously is going to be busted. When using skill 3, you kind of now target all allies instead of just the 1, and you're applying 2 weakness viruses on the enemy, 2 different elements, they don't stack, and then additional stat boosting. And it's an A6, right? It's going to be really strong. Like less than 1% of the player base is going to get to this point. But if you do get to the A6, she'll be busted, right? So all right, so next up, I want to get into our weapons a little bit. We'll start with the 3-star. I don't know if anyone's ever going to use the 3-star, but it's an 11% attack boost. Not very good. None of you are really going to use this anyway, but I do like that it's just called it's called Laptop. The 4-star is Cyberdeck Pro. What I'm going to do is I'm going to compare the fully forged 4-star to the R0 5-star, because I think that's more fair. So with the 4-star, you're increasing attack 24% at fully forged, which is pretty close to what the 5-star is doing in terms of attack boosting. I think it's 30 to 24 here. Then after inflicting virus on a foe, increase the target's damage taken by 19% for 2 turns, which I think is quite good. Gives like an additional turn to like what kind of value virus is giving you. And then the 5-star is increasing attack by 30%. When allies deal weakness damage, increase that ally's attack by 10% for 2 turns. So buffing an ally after they hit weakness for 2 turns, which is nice. And then after Futaba inflicts a debuff with a skill, increase foe's crit damage taken by 7.6 for 3 turns, can stack up to 2 times, which puts you at 15.2% for 3 turns crit damage at kind of max efficiency. And I think you will have both these stacked up fairly easily because you're debuffing with the skill 1 and then again with the skill 3. So every Futaba rotation, full rotation of her skill 1, skill 3, you are getting the 2 stacks of this. So again, I think it's quite good if you're strapped for gems, if you're going to have to go into savings, if you're going to have to spend money to get the weapon. Again, it's not like kit changing, like Chords is kit changing. Like the way you play Chord changes based on if you have that weapon or not. Futaba doesn't change her kit, it just makes her stronger. So yes, do I recommend the 5-star weapon if you have the gems and there's no like, it's just like, do I pull it or do I not? The currency is not really an issue. Yeah, I do recommend it. I think it's quite good. And yeah, obviously I'm not going to cover like the forges too much on the 5-star, but obviously it just makes what the weapon already does, just makes it much better. Huge damage increase, huge attack increase. The debuff goes up to like a max 29%. All right, so next up, I think we're going to get into the card set and kind of build portion of this. So off the top, like we went over in the skills, you do want to build Futaba into attack up to that 4600 breakpoint. That breakpoint will change again once the Mindscape stuff is updated, because then you can like break through skill levels kind of in like a separate way that you can from the awarenesses, but it's kind of similar. And the like attack that you can get up to goes up a little bit. But for all intents and purposes right now, 4600 is where you need to be at. And that's really the only skill you have to put into her. Obviously, she's a Navi, so she's sharing stats with all the other allies on the field. So you would like to increase kind of the main stats that your kind of DPS units are going to be using, which would be attack, crit mult, crit rate, attack mult are kind of what you're going to want to focus on in terms of like substats. And once you hit that 4600 on any other kind of stats that you're pulling on the cards. And then briefly, just because I kind of forgot to cover it during the skill portion, in terms of like skill level priority, I'd say skill 1 and 3 are kind of tied. I would try and get both of them up to 10, and then you can kind of skip the skill 2, and then once you have extra materials, if you want to level up the skill 2 just in case you need it. And then back to the cards, I think really like the only card set that makes like sense on Futaba is going to be Resolve and Labor. Labor is obviously the Navi set. You can see here the 4-set effect only works on navigators, and during battle increases parties max HP, attack, and defense by 8%. Just a nice flat raw, stat boost. And then when you pair it with Resolve, when equipped with a Navigator, Elucidator is a Navigator, Phantom Thief, after using a skill, inflict a debuff on a foe, decrease target's defense by 10% for 2 turns. Every skill Futaba's using is debuffing, so this just has like inherent synergy. I think this is like clearly the best set you can put together. And then I'll briefly just go into like the build of the cards. Like obviously, in terms of the space cards, like just get whatever the best thing you can is. I barely have any Resolve cards. I guess I've just gotten unlucky getting Resolve cards. The space card, I wouldn't fret too much on like the substats on the space cards. That's like more of a long-term thing because you can't really farm these. The most important thing here is obviously just getting the actual set, and then kind of you can focus on these substats or as like a long-term goal. And then I'm just going to break down kind of what main stat I put on. If you're struggling to like figure this stuff out, Lufelnet is incredibly useful for like building this stuff. It really just like puts it down on paper, like a really good general like consensus of what you should be doing if you're totally lost. On the Sun card, HP is the only main stat that's available, so just get your substats as best you can. This is actually a pretty good card. Crit mult, crit rate, attack, and attack mult is basically every stat that you want to be putting on Futaba. I've gone with attack on the Moon card just because Futaba is an attack scaling unit. Like I said, you want to hit that 4600. And then again, in terms of substats, it's just going to be crit rate, crit mult, attack, attack mult. So the more of those 4 stats you can get into the substats, the better. The star card, again, I'm running crit rate as the main stat. You'd want better substats than this, but the crit rate is the main stat that I went with here. Crit damage is also perfectly acceptable. I just didn't have a crit damage. I had crit rate, so I went with that. And then on the sky card, I went with attack again. I am over the cap by 46, but it doesn't matter as much with a navigator as it would with, say a DPS has a breakpoint, right? Because a navigator's sharing stats. So even if you double up on attack, where, you're at like 8,000 attack or whatever, 9,000 attack, you're sharing 20% of that with your allies anyway. So it doesn't really matter. Now, it's hard for me to talk about the Mindscape, so I'm only going to stay here for a second because we don't have the inner track unlocked yet, which is kind of what the benefit of Mindscape is. Like the rest of these stat increases are like kind of worthless without unlocking the inside track. So I'm just going to go kind of off what Lufelnet lists as what these will do. You can kind of tell from the icon a little bit. It seems like all of her inside tracks are pretty good, so I don't know if there's like a priority in terms of what you want to do, but there's 2 that kind of uncap her skills, like I was talking about before, that'll raise kind of the attack breakpoint that you're trying to hit. And then there's 2 that will provide your like an HP bump and a damage bump, which again, because she's sharing stats, is useful because she's a navigator. But it seems like all the Mindscapes are good. I'll give more focus to this in the future once this is unlocked, and I'll be able to like actually see what they do. In terms of like Futaba's preferred teams and rotations, pretty easy because she's a navigator, so most navigators are kind of open to working with whatever team. But Futaba is, incredibly versatile. She can work with basically any team. She's a great buffer, debuffer, and she synergizes with basically everyone because she's implanting these weaknesses. Obviously, like I said before, I do think she is like finding her max efficiency on a team that's already hitting for the weakness. So a curse weak boss, I think Futaba is getting her max value when she's on a team with curse units, curse DPS. And then the skill rotation is easy. It's skill 1, skill 3. Off of cooldown, basically. The skill 1 is a 4-turn cooldown. Once you're at 100% analysis progress, which you're pretty much always going to be at for the most part, I think. I've done a few runs of the guild boss and stuff, and I've never not been at it. And then that will rotate you into the skill 3, because you'll have Data Storm on your units now. And then the skill 3 is an 8-turn cooldown. So outside of, I think, trying to just match up your skill usage to when you're getting that additional 25% weakness damage up. But outside of that, it's really just skill 1, skill 3 off cooldown. Futaba. And then we'll get into kind of final thoughts. Do I think you should pull Futaba? Yes, I do recommend you pull her. I think she's very good. She provides a lot of value, and until probably Anj, she's going to be the best navigator in the game. Should you pull the weapon? Again, I think the weapon's very good, but I think a fully forged 4-star can get the job done completely if you are short on currency, you don't want to spend money, and you can always kind of go back and get the weapon later. But I do recommend it. I think it is a good weapon if you have the currency and you have the means. And then as far as duping her, again, I'm never going to tell you to dupe for a character, really. You're never beating a whale. Like, the A1 versus A0 is going to make no difference to someone who spent $2,000 to A6 R6 Futaba. So don't stress about it too much. Like, A0, her kit provides all the utility you need just in her A0. The A1 is just for those who want to go above and beyond. Maybe you love Futaba. You know, maybe you have additional currency and you spend a couple of bucks every patch, every month, and you feel like it's worth it for you, then absolutely go for it. Yeah. Hopefully this provided some kind of insight on the character. Hopefully you understand her a little bit better than you did before. Hopefully I explained everything as best I could. This video is going to be unbelievably long, so I'm going to try and cut it down as much as I can so it's palatable. But if I missed anything, if you have additional questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments and I will answer as best I can. And as always, I appreciate you guys watching. I will see you on the next one and have a good one.